Hello, and welcome to Crown Lane on the Record, episode number 10. It's a little milestone, but we've made it. My name is Lawrence Bradshaw, and sitting next to me is...
John Merriman.
Hi, John Merriman. Joe Marmon, Joe Merriman. John Merriman, that's the one. Welcome, guys. This is part 3 of our 3-parter of the process of recording. We are up to the final stage, the mixing stage, and we call this mixing stage the sculpting stage. Sculpt. You might have heard that before. That's part of our online mixing program. We will be talking about that, obviously, at some point to do with this. But anyway, Joe. That came out really naturally.
I just explain to the listeners who haven't listened to episodes 9, 8, 7 and 6. We had this telly, like, on YouTube, it predicts what your name is, and it predicts Lawrence on the, what's it called, the captions. And Lawrence is Lawrence Bradshaw very clearly, but I always come up as Joe Marmon.
Instead of John Merriman.
So now I'm often called
What's
that.
awful is, did you hear how naturally, I didn't mean to...
I quite like it.
Yeah. John. It is John, isn't it?
No, Joe Marmon's cool.
John, how are you? Was all I was going to ask. That's all I wanted to get to.
I'm good. I've just had a birthday, and that was very exciting.
Oh, very nice. How old are you?
How old am I now?
Yeah. You almost said
Is that
it.
public? 46.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite old, isn't it?
It's annoying that... Yeah, you can go ahead with your glass there.
I love it.
It's quite annoying how you don't look 46.
Oh.
It's really annoying. You look like 45.
I would keep these audio only. Keeps us young.
Good. Yes, nice. Lovely. Well, happy belated birthday,
Thank you very
John.
much.
Thank you very much. Right, let's get straight into it, I guess. We're talking about the mixing process. If you haven't listened to any of the others of this 3-parter, we were talking about everything that you do within the studio as you're recording, and the golden channel, as it were. And then we talked about the editing process in the last one, and now we're talking about the mixing. So, do you want to go over a very quick little overview of what we might be talking about today? And then I've got quite a specific question I want to ask you.
We're looking at how to mix, why to mix, what mixing is. And I guess here we're looking at different techniques of how it's done well and whether it's something that can be learnt or whether it's something that we just are able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first question for you, John, is... It's the question as old as nature versus nurture, I guess, which is we're thinking about, is mixing an art or is it a science?
Yeah, it's a great question. The art form that is mixing is based upon science. And I think that's where we need to begin, to understand some of the laws that are at play that we can't change, and then look at the things that we can, and the things that are just our human response to the science that exists, and how much of it is things that we can't change, that we can actually just manipulate, i.e. bass feels like a certain way, and so our body responds to it in a certain way. That is kind of a rule. Frequencies that sound harsh will always sound harsh. They are harsher to the human's ears. So based on the science, first of all, you've got the full frequency range. You can't go lower than a certain frequency, and you can't go higher because humans can't hear above that, and they can't
you're mixing for canines, obviously.
Absolutely, or you're doing a bat project. But there are very few of those around. So you've got this sort of finite amount of space to take up in your mix.
Yeah.
And then you've got the same with dynamics. So we're looking sort of from left to right. We've got the frequency range from the lowest all the way up to the highest. And then you've got from the bottom to the top the quietest sounds all the way up to the loudest. And in your mix, you've only got those constraints to play with, which is almost infinite, but you cannot make something louder than the maximum of your mix. So you've got your capped levels and you've got your capped frequency range. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of where we're playing. So that's the kind of the science that's at play. From there, from knowing what feels good within those sort of scientific boundaries, we're then looking at how do we make those things feel like the person who's listening to it wants to respond to them. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you've got a bass drum, are you trying to make the person feel it as a punch to the stomach, or are you trying to make it sort of like a gentle part of the rhythm that's kind of bouncing along, like in a Paul Simon track? The bass drum isn't hitting you like a gunshot to the stomach. It's just sort of part of the overall feel, like a train moving along. Mm. And once you've found that place in the mix and it sits there, you don't want it to change. You don't want suddenly some bass drums to be hitting you in the stomach and then others not to be. So the kind of rules are there as a sort of a guide. You found the sounds that you like as a human. And then from there, it is the art form of just going, what do I like? What do I like? What do I want it to sound like? I often view the mix as a pie chart and think, if I've only got a guitar and a voice, well, how much of that pie chart is the guitar and how much of it is the voice? Is it as simple as 50-50? Or is the guitar taking up less space in the mix than the voice? Or is it variable? There are so many plugins these days that people use. There's a lovely one made by Oak Sound that allows one thing to push through dynamically throughout a song. And we use that regularly in a lot of mixes where we get the whole band to sort of squash down when the voice sings, so that the band can take up even more space when the singer isn't singing, and then when the singer sings, it sort of pushes the band back into the mix, and you don't feel it happening, you can't tell what's happening, but there's this sort of variable pie chart sort of moulding all the time around the singer, so the singer holds their own. Obviously that technology didn't exist in the 60s and 70s, and you've got the kind of laws of a good arrangement that make a mix good. So if you're given a really good arrangement to start with, your mix is just so easy to work with. If you've got someone who's thought it through, that the rhythm guitar's sitting in this range and the player is consistent, then once you've got the level of it, the rhythm guitar is just going to sit there all the way through. And then you've got the piano and that's filling this space and it's not fighting with the rhythm guitar at all, then those two are going to work. Or if you work in dance music and you've got lots and lots of synths, if they're all fighting for the same frequencies, then the mix is going to sound cluttered. And then what you're doing is sort of corrective mixing, where you're reducing attenuating some frequencies to make sure that they are carved out for some instruments, and then making sure that other instruments can sing. And on the Sculpt course that you mentioned earlier, Sculpt is our mixing course, we do a little bit where we start off with what we call single source mixing. So how do you mix just one instrument or one voice? Is it possible to mix just one thing? Because mixing, if you're making a cake or something, you need more than one ingredient to make it a mix. But actually quite often when we're mixing, we do only just have one thing. It might be a piano recital or a guitar. And you've got all the frequencies that one instrument brings, and how do you fill a mix with all of those frequencies? And then what do you do with those when it's not just single source mixing, when you've got multiple sources at play? How do you and where do you put those frequencies that were taking up all the space and sounding beautiful when you've then got other instruments as well? How do you make sure they don't fight? And that's where you could have all the best microphones in the world on an instrument, but actually it's capturing a lot of frequencies that are then going to be in the way when you start adding lots of other instruments, which is why microphones like the SM57, which has been around forever, works so well, because it basically mixes the things that you put in front of it perfectly ready for the mix stage, because it doesn't have all the frequencies that you don't need. It just sort of focuses really well. And because the proximity effect as well, as you're close to the guitar amp, for example, or close to the snare drum, it just captures exactly what you need. So then your arrangement is kind of complete. So when you get to the mix stage, everything just sits there and it's very, very easy. So from that point of view, there is this sort of balance between it being a science. You know what the frequencies are and you know what the dynamic range is. But from there, it's the art of putting together a great arrangement. How does the arrangement work? And whatever genre. And the same with the solo instruments. So they're on the course with the single source mixing, which is right at the beginning of it. We look at just one instrument and how does that fill the whole range? Is the instrument mic'd correctly? A piano, the sound comes out of a piano everywhere. And so if you just got one mic in the wrong place, your mix even right from the beginning is going to be wrong, because what you're providing the mix engineer with is a badly recorded instrument that hasn't got the full dynamic range and the full frequency range in it because of your mic positioning. So getting those things right, i.e. the science, means that then when you come to do the artistic part, how does this instrument make me feel, then it becomes much more of a joy. There was a classical recording recently, and the person that I was working with absolutely hates all of the sort of sentimental versions of Debussy and Chopin and all the classical world, where it's all basically made to be wallpaper music, so it never disturbs you. It never jumps out of this kind of background, smooth, glossy, bell-like piano sound. But his interpretation of the original, he was talking about a particular piece by Mozart. Mozart loved bits jumping out and fighting. And when you hear him playing it, I personally, as a mix engineer, didn't like how he was playing it. So then what do we do at the mix stage? Do I try and soften all those bits out, which he would then hate? Yeah. But I know that the listener wants that. Yeah. Or do we go, do you know what? Let's be really brave. And on his previous label that he was with, when you read a lot of the comments from listeners, they're really mixed. Some people who understand he was doing the complete versions of a lot of Mozart piano sonatas. And his versions of some of them had people whinging about they hated particular interpretations of them. And then other people go, oh, finally, somebody's not doing this smoochy, glossy sounding.
Do you think that's because as society now in like 2025, even the last sort of 20 years, that the majority of people who are listening to classical music will normally be doing it as an aid to studying or sleeping? It's become so popular with a demographic that would never have listened to classical that now you go on Spotify and write, classical playlists for studying, and people use it for that reason a lot now. That there's an expectation that it needs to be mixed and it's sounding that way.
Totally. We always mix to playlists now.
Yeah.
And we always think, where is this going to end up? Or where does the person want it to end up?
Yeah.
We're not thinking about an album. Where's this going to sit on the album? Sometimes we are, but rarely.
Yeah.
But looking at a playlist, if you've got something in your track that's going to kill a playlist, and that means that people are going to stop listening to the playlist, then your song is going to be taken out of that. And then it won't be popular, and then you won't get the listens, and then you won't get the royalties. So, yeah you're completely right.
Okay. Talking about the artistic side of things then. How to phrase this? I guess, do you ever encounter any issues where there's... Sorry, John's very gently, very carefully putting a glass of water down on the table as to not disturb. Thank you for that, John. Perfectly mixed in the balance. Do you ever have it where there's a sort of too many cooks issue when it comes to the mix stage? I'm just thinking about, if you have a song, let's imagine now a rock band, a 5-piece rock band, and all they've ever done is rehearsed and played this song and it's perfect. Then once it's recorded, it's a completely different kettle of fish. And you've got their interpretation of how they want it to end up sounding. Maybe a producer like yourself who thinks, oh, that's really not going to help you out here. Here's how it should be. Or, other producers who might be involved in it. Is it difficult then having multiple heads in one space for one song in that mix stage?
Ultimately, the buck stops with the person who's paying. And as a producer, often you have to revert to the role of engineer and know that what we are doing is providing what the client wants. Yeah. Whether or not that's what we would want. Yeah. And we actually, and I'll be very vulnerable in saying this, we had a project recently where I fell in love with probably 8 of the tracks on the album. It's a great project. And of those 8 tracks, there were a few that I absolutely loved, but I felt they needed a certain thing doing to them. So I worked quite hard on sculpting that. I have to hold that very loosely because on the spectrum from I've got ultimate creative control all the way down to actually at the end of the day I'm being paid to mix this how the client wants it. I'm down that end. And so whether or not I fall in love with the mix that I've finished, I have to listen to the client. And the client decided they loved a sound that was softer, a sound that was more akin to 1970s mixing. Yeah. And our desk here, because we'd also recorded the project here, is a sort of early mid-80s sounding desk. It's a desk built by Oram, who used to work for Trident. So it's got that kind of mid-80s warmth to it, the sort of vintage desk sound. And with that sound, I could see why he fell in love with the mixes that we'd sent him previously, which were just the band recording, and they sound stunning. So by the time I'd done the mixing as to how people expect it today on the playlists, he felt that something was missing because of all the sort of manipulated sound that was brought in, where I'd added things to enhance the snare drum, for example, to make the snare drum really sit consistently in the mix. He didn't like that. Yeah. So I have to then lose my attachment to the mix I've got because my role is engineer, not producer, though I've come to love some of the tracks. Yeah. And then going back and going, I have to love the person whose project it is enough to know that them being happy with it and is far more important than me being happy with it. But also, what is it that they like? Because I need to fall in love with what it is they like. And if that is the 70s sound, that means me steeping myself again back into some of the mixes of, we were listening to some earlier 80s bands. And when you hear that sound, I then go, I get you. I understand you better. So by understanding the client better, I could then go back to those mixes and go, I can see why he didn't like the contemporary sound anywhere near as much. And then I can then go, right, let's park that. Let's look at the mix. And I think that's why it's important to have different iterations of mixes. We have on Pro Tools a auto backup that's saving every 10 minutes. And so we can go back as far as we need to on a mix and go, oh yeah, when he last liked the mix, it was then. And then I've done lots of editing since then. So then I can take the edits that I've done, so we've got far more accurate playing, and then put the mix from the mix he liked, and then we get the best of both worlds, and then everybody's happy. It's very difficult to know when to stop. It's very difficult to know when it's right and when it's not. But at the end of the day, if the client's paying...
We're going to come on to that in the second half, actually. I've got a question for you about that. But yeah, I guess to kind of round that off, it's a huge part of the process, isn't it? And that it can be taken in so many different directions. Like if you recorded a track and then gave it to 5 mix engineers with 0 notes and said, make something from this, they would all sound completely different, wouldn't they? And it's just...
There's a really good album recently that Peter Gabriel brought out, and he couldn't decide between the 2 mixes, so he brought out 2.
Oh, really?
So it was released and it's a double album. And I think there's always a bias because the one that comes first, I was only looking this week, and the play count is higher on that. But I imagine naturally more people would listen to the first one first because that's how we operate. But the second one has an awful lot as well. And the mix is different, and it contains different elements as well. The mix engineers left some things out. So it's...
What's it called?
Dark side and light side of the same project.
That.
It's a very clever idea, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break now. My word, if there was ever a better time for an advert to be placed within an episode in the whole of podcasting history, it would be right now.
Passionate about podcasts and sound? Dive into the Sculpt mixing course. Developed over 2 years, this online course delivers top-tier mixing tips straight from our bustling commercial studio. With guided videos, downloadable audio content, and a comprehensive handbook, you'll elevate your skills at your own pace. Visit crownlanestudio.co.uk/education and enter podcast special at checkout for an exclusive 30% discount. At Crown Lane, we help you sound better. Download now and let's get back to the episode.
And that's it. We're already here. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to get back into conversation on mixing. A question that I desperately want to ask here. How much is too much? That's the broad question here. It's so easy to get carried away in any art form. And most artists, as in painting artists, will often say knowing when to stop is always the most difficult part, especially when you leave it and you come back. You think, this is perfect, you leave it, and then you come back a day later, I could always just... So what is the best way to know how to stop, or when to stop? I guess finance is when people run out of money on their project and budget. But for you, John, as a mix artist in this sense, when do you stop? What's perfect?
Such a difficult... And is there such thing as perfect?
Yeah.
Is a mix ever perfect? I think I've got some mixes that are my favourite version of songs that are terrible mixes, but they're perfect. That version is something that I just absolutely love. I don't know when to stop. I do know that AI is a decision of efficiency, and if you choose to use AI to mix your track... then it's done immediately. So to answer your question of how much is too much, if we look at how much is too little, then perhaps we can find a happy middle ground. So to mix something using AI is done immediately. You put the parts in and it will churn out a rough mix.
Yeah.
Or there are other ways to do a mix quickly. For example, the pink noise method, which is where you put pink noise on, similar to white noise, which is... White noise is all frequencies all the time. Pink noise is measured slightly differently. I won't go into that now, but it's slightly bass heavier. And you put the pink noise on and you have all of your mix stems down. So all you can hear is pink noise. And then you push up each component of your mix up until you can just hear it.
Yeah.
And then you add the drums, fading them up, and then the bass, and then all the different components till you can just hear every single one. If something's poking out too much, you bring it down. And then you mute the pink noise. Oh, you do it all in mono. So you do it all in mono, so you're not confused by where sound's coming from. It's all just coming from one place. And then you mute the pink noise and you put it back to stereo. And you'll probably find the mix is quite accurate. That's probably the quickest way you could do it. Both of those methods, imagine having a client in the room and you just pressing AI and go, right, there's your mix done. or the pink noise method and go, right, I've kind of done it. What do we think? Yeah, it's all right. That, I would say, is probably too little. And there's no heart in it. There's no decision to think, okay, what about contours in this mix? What about looking rather than just at a single point in time is this mix? What about the linear process? Is it mixed and balanced at the beginning? And what about by the time the song's built up? Is it still mixed there? Or do we need to automate things as the song goes on? So there's all of that both AI and the pink method don't cover. And also, where do you want the build to be? Do you want to enhance the build? Do you want to put any spikes in it? We do this lovely thing, which is where sometimes you have to tell the listener what they're listening to. And AI doesn't know which bit of the mix you want the listener to hear. And it's like psychoacoustics. And you put a little notch in the volume where you just boost it for a split second at the entry point of the thing that you want the listener to pick up on. So you might pique the listener's interest on, maybe it's a saxophone entry that actually the saxophone sits nicely in the mix, but you want it just to catch the imagination of the listener. And so you'll boost the volume there just slightly. And the listener isn't even aware. They just think, oh, the sax has come in. But rather than turning the sax up for the whole section of the sax being there, you've done those little sort of marker points. That, I would say, is looking at the song in its linear fashion is the bit that is, once you've done that and you've thought about what's the journey that we're taking the listener on from beginning to end, then I would say is pretty much done. You've made sure everything's balanced using whatever method.
That is more like the scientific angle then, isn't
Absolutely.
it? What we were saying earlier.
And then you do the artistic, where you're taking the listener on the journey.
Yeah.
We were doing a mix recently, and it had two different instruments, and I had interpreted it as a battle between the two instruments. So one plays, then the next plays, and it's passed to and fro. And then listening with the person who had written the song, they were like, no, they're not at all. This is a guitar song. The guitar is playing, and in the background is the second instrument. And the background instrument is incidental in force. So then it was, okay, I totally understand. I'd misunderstood the request at that point in the song. Personally, I would love it to be an equal battle. That's my preference. And AI doesnnt know any of that. And the pink noise method doesn't know that.
Yeah.
So you have to go on that journey and think, where am I taking the listener and what does the client want? And then you can get to a point where this mix sounds complete.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can go on forever doing all the little details. And that can be a bit of a rabbit hole. But I would just say, as soon as you've got to the point where you think, that's there, save it. Burn it off. Make sure you can get back to that iteration of it.
That's a really good point, isn't it? Because, again, sometimes in any form of art where you keep adding, and then all of a sudden you look at it or listen to it and you think, oh, I don't like this at all. You know, what was I thinking? So to have save points is a really, really good idea, isn't it?
And the same at the recording stage as well. I know there's, on the Marvin Gaye song, What's Going On, there's different bits of the song use different takes.
Yeah.
Most of it's the guide track. And I think if they had just thought, a later take will be better and not kept the guides, then the song wouldn't sound like how we know the song to be.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to think, okay, we were happy at that point. Why are we now not happy at that point?
Yeah.
What we've done, has that added value?
Yeah.
Or is it just a distraction? And have we gone down a rabbit hole that we shouldn't have gone down?
And with the sort of advance in tech, especially if you're looking at the last sort of 30 years of recording, making something perfect isn't always the answer because you're not making something human, I guess. I was going to ask you what the quote in Jurassic Park is. You wouldn't know because you don't watch film. But it's the, we spent so long wondering whether we could.
Is that near Hyde Park?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, very close.
Yeah, I know.
One's a lot noisier than the other.
Okay.
We spent so long wondering whether we could. We didn't stop to think whether we should. And it's kind of like, you know, in magazines where you have a photo of a person, there's so much Photoshop done afterwards that although it's a stunning looking human, there is nothing human left about that person. Those people don't walk around the streets, you know. And with music as well, when we listen to music sometimes, it's... my word, it's so hard listening to music with you in the office because if we're playing a Stevie Wonder, this is one of my favourite songs, Stevie Wonder's a genius, and then we're enjoying it, you say, you're about to hear a sax that's slightly out of tune, by the way, it's 2 minutes 13, and then it will happen. And there is all these imperfections in some of your favourite music, definitely in some of mine, that you don't mind at all because it's character and it's human. And then when you erase everything and make something sound perfect, I'm doing air quotes, by the way, Is it enjoyable anymore? I find it really, really difficult to listen to extremely overproduced music that sounds perfect.
I think I'm very lucky that I don't have such thing as a guilty pleasure. There's a lot of pop that I absolutely love. And we play this little game in the car with whoever's in it. And if you lose the game, you have to get out. It's pretty cruel.
At the next safe moment or just whenever?
Oh, no. I'll make the moment save very quickly. So you've got a phone and you've got a playlist and you add next song and it has to be better than the one before. But not better for you, better for the collective in the car. And if it is, you get to stay in the car and you go, oh, great song. And if it isn't, and it might be that it's actually a brilliant song, but it just doesn't do that thing that it needs to. And what we've found invariably is where it ends up is somewhere that feels great. And you've got a lot of bass, or you've got a hook, or the drums are more powerful, because you're always thinking, what is one better than the person before? And so this little game has actually led me to realise these are the things that people love about music. Yeah. And when you see the fun in the car, whether or not I like the song, because I see the joy and I feel the joy from the kids or whoever else is with us, it's just such a lovely feeling because you're all sharing this moment with music that is collectively an enjoyable experience. So even though it's not a genre that I would choose to love, in those contexts, I've learnt to love it. And I've always loved a lot of pop. I remember there's an album, I'll say it. It was years ago when the Mika album came out.
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
The production on that is on another level if you listen to the little details in it for a pop album. But everything is so polished and so tight and so squeaky perfect for its time. Yeah. But it's still got kind of a little bit of rock edge to it. It's got like real drums and things in places, but it's clinically perfect. I think there's a lot of joy in that as well.
Yeah, but sometimes that, depending on what the overall feel is, sometimes that absolutely does well. I mean, talking about guilty pleasure, I mean, sometimes I really like awful, like Europop, if I'm in the right mood and I just want to listen to it, and I do. And that is nothing more like factory made than that, and sometimes that is really enjoyable.
The Eurovision Song Contest, we have the party, and I've either had it at my house or last year we had it down here because we had quite a lot of people, and it's such a great night because it's where technology gets pushed to the limit. So last year was the invention of a new kind of camera that could zoom from the back of the stadium right down to a hair follicle, and so they were trying out that kind of tech, the visual side, but also sound tech. They've been trying lots of different new tech on sound. I remember one of the camera techniques that was new this last year was the French entry, and the whole song was filmed by one camera operator in front, and he had gimbal operated screens, gimbal operated everything on this huge rack, and it was filmed so beautifully, and sort of the art of that. And I love the pop and the sort of, I hate to use the word plastic, but the perfection that doesn't actually exist in nature. Yeah. I've chosen to embrace that side and love it. And when we've had these parties, I've had them every year now for, I don't know, nearly 2 decades. And there is such joy in that music, and the sort of hearing how people are pushing the boundaries of that kind of stuff. It's not natural, and it goes against all my sort of sustainability credentials. It doesn't feel right. It's not even how music was intended to be, but it makes you feel a certain thing.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that. And that's such a good point, it's not natural, as in, a lot of these like really overly produced pop songs, you couldn't get a bunch of musicians live on stage to reproduce that sound just by playing, so, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. No, it doesn't. I think for me, the biggest thing I struggle with, and I will not name any particular names, but I was showing you in the office earlier on, there's a certain movie actor, a movie star, who's doing like quite a heavier rock sound, and it is so plastic sounding that it just is really counterintuitive to the genre. And it just what is the point in this?
There's a lot of templating in that genre, if it's what I think you're playing. And like when you do a snare drum, you will always trigger a snare drum to make it perfect. And it might have 8 or 9 different triggers of different snares to make you feel all the different things that snare drum's meant to have. Yeah. And once you've done it and you've mixed albums like that, it's really hard to come to the next one and just go, no, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to keep this loose. Yeah. And it becomes like a drug, and it has to have all of that on it for it to actually exist as a properly produced song. And, you learn your lesson very quickly when you're then producing something that's in an older style and you put contemporary production on it, and it's not what the client needs at all.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm quite happy with that answer. So thank you very much, John. Our tips and tricks section, well, couldn't be easier again. We're going to shamelessly say it. If you want to learn as much as you possibly can about mixing, get our course. Go to our website, find our course. It has everything that you would ever need on there for mixing at home. Is there anything else that you want to add on to that, John?
Yeah, the course is designed if you're working in education, you're a teacher, and you want to know if you want to be 2 steps ahead of the people that you're teaching, or if you want to be working with, maybe you're in a church or you've got a small venue that you're doing the sound out, live sound, studio work, or at home. It doesn't sit on a specific operating system. It doesn't sit on a specific door. Mm-hmm. Lots of it's filmed using Pro Tools because that's what we use, but we talk generically about all the different terms.
Yeah.
And the course ends with this gorgeous bit which we only finished last year, which was I live mix a song from start to finish where I've never seen it before. All the things are in a folder. I open the folder live with the live audience in the studio, and I take the stems and I put them into my session. And the whole time I'm doing it, I'm talking through what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what I think I might do with it at the end, or the questions I've got, or the things that don't make sense. And what we haven't done is edit out all the times I go down a dead end. So most of the videos and tutorials online, they already know how they're going to, what plugins they're going to press and how the mix is going to sound.
Yeah, everything's already ready and there's loads of jump cuts. Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah. Or they put the plugins in and then they bypass them all and then they say, right, I'm going to add a compressor, and then they've spent ages getting it. All of that is done real time, so you can see how long it actually takes to get all those things in a mix. So to answer the earlier question about how long does it take, well, you can watch it in real time as part of the course. Yeah. And that was one of the best bits of the course, I think, having people in there. And at any point, anyone in the audience can ask a question. So there's some really brilliant questions as well during it, which some of them, one of my favourite ones in it is I'm discussing about triggering drums and what trigger to use and where we've put it. And one of the people in the audience just goes, I've got a question. Why are you doing that? And I realised autopilot. I just got to the snare drum, did my usual things, made a trigger of it, put a new snare on it. This is where we're going, without even thinking, gosh, why am I doing that? And it was the person asking in the room that then meant I could talk through, this is why we do this. And then, makes more sense. So it's a brilliant course. All the beginning bit is all about the fundamentals of mixing, goes through all the little tiny bits that make up the science of mixing. Mm-hmm. And then we go on to the art form at the end.
Beautiful. Lovely. Are we still running a podcast discount on that?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, it says it in the other, doesn't it? Great. And then the last thing is recommendations. And John and I have a very specific recommendation for you.
Are we excited, Lawrence?
The excitement really is starting today. So we have our second series or season, however you want to pronounce it, of Crown Lane Live. We did speak about this very briefly in the last episode. It's coming up in April. It's the first week of April. We're very, very excited about it. And unlike last time, we've got a whole week of it. So before we did it across 6 months and it was a random night every now and again. You're right there, John. John just fell over. Made me very happy. We're not cutting any of that. There we go. And the piano. And for this season, however you want to call it, we have every single night of the week. So from Monday all the way to the Saturday, we've got different artists, 2 different artists per day, all being filmed and recorded live in Crown Lane Studio and put across to Metronome. There's going to be ticketed events, tours around the studio in between, and loads of fun musical things happening. The artists will be releasing soon of who's going to be there. But this, I guess, is the first real public announcement that it is all going ahead first week of April.
And tickets are all on metronome.life, at the front of the studio is the coffee shop and event space. And that is where Crown Lane Live really takes shape. So you can see on the huge screen in there and listen through the Genelec speakers, and you can hear studio quality and watch exactly what's going on in the studio. Enjoy a drink, you can have a chat and have a brilliant social night, and then come through, see what's going on in the studio, take part in the sessions, see what the musicians are actually doing during a live studio session.
Yeah, I can't wait. It is going to be insane. It's going to be brilliant.
April 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's it. Right, well, that's that for now. The next episode of Crown Lane on the Record is going to be all about accessibility within the industry. And we've got some very special guests who are joining us as well. I'm not even going to say who. They're lined up, but we got 3 different guests who are going to be appearing on it. Can't wait for it.
See you in a month.
See you in a month. Take care. Bye-bye.